Yeah, so hello everybody, wherever you are in the world. And before we get started, we'd just like to thank the sponsors of this event and the organisers and yourselves, of course, for attending. So, on that note, welcome to today's session, GitHub DevOps Duet, SQLDay edition, which you can see the slides for on the center screen. This is a tale about how a development team and an operations team have to bond together and start using GitHub for SQL deployments.
So for the next 60 minutes, we'll be talking about GitHub and how we can use it for data platform deployments, from creating a work item all the way to its release. And we'll be discussing both the cloud and on-premise versions of GitHub, as well as its features like the source control, the issues, the GitHub Actions and packages. And even though this is a GitHub session, we will also mention Azure DevOps. And at the end of this session, you will have a basic understanding of the main features of GitHub and how it can be used with SQL Server deployments.
To give this session a bit of context, one of us is from the SQL development team and the other from the SQL operations team. Our manager has decided that both teams will merge into one DevOps team, so that we're all one big happy family.
In reality, this should be a real gradual process. However, since this is a 60-minute session, we've taken it upon ourselves to speed up this process. In addition, our manager has decided that the development team lead will become the Scrum Master and the operations team lead will be the product owner.
So, for those of you who don't know, a product owner is responsible for translating business needs into workable backlog items for Scrum sprints, which means they must speak to stakeholders at various levels within the business. In addition, they are ultimately responsible for prioritizing those items, even though they may get input about those priorities from various stakeholders.
And the Scrum Master's role is to empower the team to do those backlog items by encouraging how they work and removing any impediments that may appear.
Yeah, and before we go any further, Sandro, let's introduce ourselves.
Yes, shall we? So my name is Sander. I'm a SQL Server DBA and living in the Netherlands. I work for Data Mastermind since a couple of weeks, and I am a Cloud and Data Center MVP. I'm a major contributor to the DBA Tools project, and I've worked in various sectors in the from agriculture to financial industries to healthcare. So I've probably seen it all. You can follow me on Twitter. There's my Twitter handle. I also have a blog, which I try to write as much as I can, but yeah, too many projects as usual. If you have any questions after this session, feel free to send me an email. And any demos you'll see today will also be on my GitHub page. Go to the presentations and then find this session and you will have the demos available there. You can change them or reteach them or use them, whatever you want to do with them. They're yours to experiment with. And now Kevin has a slightly more complicated bio than I have.
Thanks for that, Sander. And I'll try and keep it as brief as possible, I promise. So on that note, my name is Kevin Chant. I'm now a lead BI and analytics architect living in the Netherlands, formerly a senior database architect. However, some of you can probably tell from the accent, I'm actually originally from the southwest of the UK. Basically, I'm an Englishman, living in the Netherlands, working for a French-based company because he met a woman in Australia. Now, whenever I say this out loud, I realize why Sander thinks this is complicated.
Mm-hmm.
I have quite a few years' experience working in IT, and over that time, I've worked in various sectors, including the banking, oil, and health insurance industries. I've also worked with all versions of SQL Server in one form or another, and I have various certifications, including one of the more recent ones being the Microsoft Certified DevOps Engineer Expert. Kind of relevant for this session. And as you can see on the screen, I'm also a Microsoft Certified Trainer and a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. And just like Sander, you can contact me in numerous ways on social media below. I have my own blog as well as my own GitHub. So,
cool. So anyway, we should discuss whether to use a cloud or on-premise version of GitHub. For example, we have GitHub Enterprise or GitHub One. And because if we want to use a cloud-based product, we have other versions to choose from.
I thought there was only the free version or enterprise to choose from.
Oh, there's more than that.
Well, since you mentioned it, you might as well list them all for everybody here. However, before you start, since we are on Avatar here today, feel free, everybody, to guess how many versions there are in the chat before Sander starts naming them all. On that note, you might as well start, Sander.
Cool. So, first of all, there's GitHub Free for user accounts. Then there is GitHub Pro, which comes with some extra features like required pull request reviewers. We then have GitHub Free for organizations, which includes features like team discussions, and this is a good option for entry-level teams. This is followed by GitHub Team, which introduces a lot more features than the free version. For example, you will also have the team pull request reviewers in this version. We then have GitHub Enterprise, which can be used either in the cloud or self-hosted on premises. And it has GitHub Connect for unified contributions, and you can manage billing for multiple GitHub organizations. And finally, there's GitHub One, which has all the features of enterprise along with additional support, insights, and advanced security.
Hang on. How can security in GitHub Enterprise get any more advanced?
Yeah, well, it allows you to secure features you use in the public repositories like code scanning and dependency reviews in your private repositories as well.
Okay, well, on that note, what I will actually do is put a link about all the various GitHub products in the chat for everybody, so there as well. So obviously after the session, you can go on and have a look at all the different details about the different ones.
Mm-hmm. So
Just like copy and paste that right out. I just wanted to make sure I got the right one for everybody. So anyway, personally, Sander, I'd like to use the on-premises version so that we can handle security better on premises. For example, GitHub Enterprise, which you can install on your own servers. However, the downside is that we'd have to build one or more servers with GitHub Enterprise installed for business continuity reasons. Plus, we'd have to invest a lot of time and money straight away and justify it to the business. And we'd have to also patch and maintain all those servers.
Well, but if you use GitHub in the cloud instead, you won't have to patch and maintain anything, as it's all done behind the scenes for you.
That's true. And we can still secure whichever version we use anyway. Besides, whichever we use, we still must consider security and compliance to keep our auditors happy. Luckily, GitHub is well structured and easy to manage.
So the main point we want you to take away from this section is that there are multiple versions of GitHub, including some very good free versions that you can use. And if you install GitHub on premises, you have to patch and maintain those servers yourself. Whereas with the cloud-based version, it's all done behind the scenes for you. So let's go and look at a GitHub organization. So I can go in here. Wait. So let's go to my organizations, and here I am. Here I have all the organizations that I am a part of. So we are going to look at the data platform organization, which is our demo one. And if I go to the settings, I have a lot of options in there. So we'll have something like the profile, who is the billing contact person. This is a danger zone. Don't change these kind of settings without really understanding what you're doing, because if you delete it, it's gone. It's everything in the organization is also gone. Billing and plans, which is really a good overview of what your costs are or what they're going to be. Member privileges. So do I want to have private repositories? Can they make public and private pages? All those kind of things. Organizational security. Nowadays, you should have two-factor authentication enabled all the time whenever possible. So we have that enabled as well. Security analysis, which is really handy if you want to do anything with dependencies. Verified domains. We don't have anything in here, but you can use other domains and organizations. An audit log, because I always want to know what Kevin is doing on our organization. Some webhooks. Maybe you want to integrate this with Slack or with Microsoft Teams, for instance. Third-party access needs a password, so you can add third-party applications to your organization. Other apps from GitHub, scheduled reminders, so you can actually use, oh, that's really cool. You can use Slack and everything to get your reminders going. Repository topics. A new one. You can actually set the topic for your organization. Repository defaults. Nowadays, with it is no longer a standard to use the name master for the main branch, so we use main instead. Kind of standard nowadays. Maybe somebody deleted a repository. You can find it back. Find it right here. Any projects that need specific permissions, all the teams with if you allow teams to have these discussions, etc., etc., etc. Actions, which we will talk about later in this session, which are really handy. So, do you want to allow actions to happen? Packages, secrets. Developer settings, so know if you have any other owned applications. And of course, there are possibilities to moderate this organization by maybe even blocking someone. Let's see if I can find.
You're not going to block me, are you?
No, I was trying to.
Might make some future demos a bit hard.
Yeah. But so that is in a really fast flight what you can set. There are loads of settings that you can set on the organization level. But it is worth going through those before you start doing anything.
Well,
so
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, that is very useful. And like you said, we can configure even more as well if we dive even deeper into all these settings. And what I will actually do now is put a link in the chat for everybody so they can see how they can create their own organization if they want to as well.
So let's. So the main thing I want you to take away from this is how GitHub settings can be fine-tuned, and how these features depend on what version of GitHub you are running, because you may not have all these settings if you have the free account compared to the enterprise account. And it also differs if your repository is private or public. So anyway, now we've covered the main admin stuff. Let's cover our version control options with GitHub.
You mean like source safe?
Well, no. The clue here is that it's in the GitHub in its name. Git has become the de facto standard nowadays for distributed version control systems, and unfortunately and fortunately, it's the only version control system you can use on GitHub.
So, if you want to use Team Foundation version control, you'll have to look at an alternative. I hear it's supported in Azure DevOps, Sander.
Yeah, well, let me show you how it looks in GitHub. So if I go to my organization.
So back to the right screen again.
Yep. We can go to the SQL deployment. If I go to the data platform and click on our repository, this is our version control. So this is our repository for GitHub. And if you look, if you're familiar with Git, this looks very familiar. So we can actually go through a couple things here. We have the code, the issues. Issues are, maybe a weird name, but issues are, it could be features or actually problems, as well as bugs. You have your pull requests, which are used to go from one branch to another. So if you have a feature branch and you want to merge that into development, you use that with a pull request. You have the actions, which you will see later on in the session as well. Any projects, so you can make as many projects as you want. You can actually, if you do a new project, there are different templates that we can use. There's a wiki, which is really handy. And we really have a nice logo in here for SQLDay as well. Security. So these are some security policies that we can set. Security advisory. So maybe there's something you want to set an advisory that something has to be a certain version. Dependabot, so maybe any dependencies and code scanning alerts. So you can set all kinds of actions that scan your code for security scans or anything with Kubernetes. So be a script analyzer is really handy if you use something with PowerShell. Any insights, this is not available in every version of GitHub. If you have GitHub free and you have a private repository, you probably don't have insights. Settings, similar to the ones we have on the organization level, but just way less. So you still have the repository name. Don't rename this with because if you do that, it also changes all the connections with all the repositories people have. So if with all the branches and everything. Other settings you can use, you can even set up a sponsor. Manage access. I don't want to do that. Security analysis, again, we add that on. You can set this as well on the on this level as well as the organization level. Anything with branches, which branches do we have? We can even, later on, we'll also talk about branch protection rules, the webhooks, notifications, actions, environment, and again, moderation settings as well. So we can set a lot on this level if we don't want to do this on the organization level. And of course, some of these, like I said, some of these settings depend on which version of GitHub you're using. In our case, we have quite a few, but if you have something like a free version, you have less of these settings available. And if I search for anything, I can go through millions of repositories. Which one shall I do? Something like SQL Server documentation. Can I do that? In all of GitHub. Oh, there it is. So even the Microsoft is using GitHub for all SQL docs as well. So that is pretty cool. So, and it's really fast, as you can see.
Yeah. And I'm getting this bit of deja vu about you showing this documentation. So if you've mentioned about the Microsoft repositories in GitHub before to answer a very common question we keep getting asked.
Yep.
In fact, GitHub put a lot of effort into make behind the scenes to make sure this search works as fast as possible. Rumor has it that it's actually based on another database engine, though, Sander. So let's move forwards. So moving on from there, what about branching strategies? Because I hear they're pretty important.
Yeah, they are. And there are various ones that we can use. For instance, we have the Git flow and the GitHub flow.
Well, obviously, I've got a diagram of one of them up on the center screen at the moment. But I'm wondering what the difference is between those two, because they sound pretty similar to me.
Yeah, they are. So the major difference between the two is that with the Git flow, you don't directly merge into the main branch unless it's a hotfix. And with the GitHub workflow, there is not a development branch. There are only feature branches, and there's the main branch. So anything that is tested and approved will get merged right into the main branch. And no prizes for guessing that GitHub created this workflow to support their development process. But as devs have been using source control for many years, so if we do something like pair programming between dev and ops members, we can probably get used to how all this works.
Peer programming.
No, yeah, something. So it's pair programming, where two people actually work on the same code together. And research has shown it usually takes a bit longer to do. However, it means you end up with more stable code and people learn new coding practices better.
Wouldn't that mean there's a lot of overhead involved with that practice?
Well, you think that, and you will also be correct. There is about a 50% overhead. 15%, not 50, 15%. But that overhead is largely compensated with the increased quality of code, which means less bug fixes in production. And we all know that the later in the stage of development we find our bugs, the more expensive and time-consuming it becomes. There are other methods that we can use, like code reviews as well. And at the end of the day, we just have to experiment what works best for us.
Okay, so what's to stop somebody coding their own release and pushing it straight to the main branch?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So I kind of showed that during the settings, but there's something like branching policies that we can use. And one of which is that two people must approve updates to the main branch. And it does this by making what you call a pull request. And I'll give you one guess to which awesome service came up with that name.
Well, that sounds good. And I think we need to do that to be SOX compliant anyway, since we deal with financial data.
Mm-hmm.
And I know how to do it in Azure DevOps, but how do we do it in GitHub?
Well, we have to go to, and this is going to be on the right screen again. We have to go to the pull requests, and then we create a new pull request. And I can set this. Oh wait, it's in a different one. Do we use demo project? Pull request. New pull request. Demo branch. And here I can create my pull request and then say create it. And as soon as I do that, I can set the reviewers that have to be included. So I can set Kevin to be one of the reviewers, and he will get a message saying, "Hey, you need to review this code for me," and this otherwise it will not be applied and not be approved to go into that other branch. So that is how you set the reviewers. Do I show them the branching policies as well? Might as well do that. So if we go to the branches, we can set this as default, but unfortunately I cannot set this on this level. So I'm going to go to my other project and I go to the branching policies. And here I can set a rule. I can give it a pattern. So maybe I want this to happen for the main branch, and then require pull request reviewers before merging, and set this to 2. Then you can set your branching policies based on the SOX compliancy. So this is how you can set your branching policies and how you can set your reviewers on the using your pull requests. And these are the main points we want you to take away from this section about GitHub. So GitHub supports only Git version control. It has become the facto standard. So if you use any other version control system at the moment, you probably want to look into switching over to Git. In addition, you can secure your updates using branching policies, and Git also hooks in very nicely with a variety of tools, including something like Visual Studio or Azure Data Studio as well.
Yeah, so you can use it in Azure Data Studio, for example, to manage database projects that you've got in GitHub. And I can actually very quickly share that here. So for those of you who don't know, Azure Data Studio is an alternative to SQL Server Management Studio. There are a lot of differences between the two applications. Admittedly, SQL Server Management Studio is a lot more established. However, Azure Data Studio has a few different extras added to it, and it's multi-platform as well. And you can actually add an extension to Azure Data Studio, as you can see here, called SQL Database Projects, which allows you to view database projects within Azure Data Studio. Okay, anyway, Sander, we better discuss work items in GitHub, since I'm going to be using them to organize our backlog items.
Okay, yeah. Well, you can see that. So we have something like, it's called work items in GitHub. So it's called issues. And we have a whole sections just for this. So people can add their issues here, and they are going to be dealt with. We can even put a level of automation in them, like something with the actions later on. And it's also really simple to use, and people have been using GitHub for years. So this is kind of become the standard how to use it.
And I'm guessing then, if we're going to use it to plan work efficiently, we have to create a project in GitHub as well.
Yeah, so I kind of went through that before, but we can go to the projects and we can go to a new project. And and there are various types of boards that we can use to manage our repositories. We can use something like Kanban or automated Kanban. So this is a basic board, and this has some triggers in it. Automated Kanban with reviews or bug triage. So there are some templates that we can use right from the start, or just to do none and create everything from scratch for this project ourselves. So these are really nice, really easy to use pre-configured templates, and I would really recommend looking into those.
Yeah, and in addition to that as well, Sander, if we decide to use Agile or Scrum, we could always look to integrate Azure DevOps with GitHub and use Azure boards for work items instead to take advantage of the functionality there and integrate the two together.
Yep.
That's another option we can take.
Yep, exactly. So one thing we can use with GitHub is something called tags, just like a git tag from the command line. These can be used to automate other processes and also give you a basic or give you an overview of what a particular issue is part of. Maybe it's a feature, maybe it's a bug, something like that. And if I go to an issue, I can actually show you that it has all kinds of labels in there. So maybe you want to enhance your issues with anything like this. I think it's a really nice feature, and it helps me to understand anything that comes in my issues for all my projects. So yeah, that is kind of labels. I think we can go into the GitHub Actions right now.
I'm already there on the center slide.
Yeah. So GitHub introduced its own CI/CD system a while ago, and it's called GitHub Actions. And those of you who know Azure DevOps can think of it as GitHub's version of the Azure pipelines. It's purely YAML based, so nobody gets confused about what format to use. Plus, the marketplace is dynamic. None of this having to install extensions nonsense that we have with Azure DevOps.
Well, that's great because it means you can create YAML CI/CD pipelines in GitHub directly. So how would we use GitHub Actions to update and deploy SQL Server?
Well, we could look to deploy using either state-based or migration-based deployments.
Well, what's the main difference between those two?
So state-based is something like you can imagine it like the destination of your journey. It checks for all the changes that you made and then checks the target. And then based on these two, it makes a comparison and creates a script. And the script is going to be deployed to the target. Migration-based is a very good solution, and it's more the road towards your destination. So you start at one point and you can get all kinds of intermediate scripts that have to be applied in a certain order to the target. So it's more about the entire journey, what changed along the way. It's pretty easy to build such a pipeline with SQL Server updates, as I will demonstrate right now because I made a little script for that.
So back over to the right-hand screen.
Yep. So one thing I didn't like to do with the state-based was that I had to create a solution and then create one or more projects within my solution, which was just a lot of work. So what I did was I created a template using the PS module development PowerShell module. This is developed by Friedrich Weinmann, and this enables me to templaterize either a single file or an entire directory structure with all its files and directories in it. And this may look like a lot of code, but it's actually the most important command is the invoke psmd template, which wants a name, an out path where to send it to, and then a project name. And if I run that, so create my SSDT project, it will download my project from my GitHub page, and now I have my solution ready to go. Oh, there we go. So if I open that in Visual Studio, seconds, yeah, my license will expire. Go away. I have two projects in here. One is my unit testing is the name of my database, and then data is for the data model. And I have a tests project. And my data model will contain anything like all the objects for my database. And I can just go right-click this project and then say import database, select a connection. I'm going to get my local host, object type, and then say start. And this will import all my objects. I create a small demo database with some random tables and store procedures in it. And all my objects are in here right away. So I can start doing stuff with source control and putting my database in a solution. I don't have to do the import in the test project because there's already a reference from the other data model project. So anything that I do with unit testing can just be in here. And if I do any deployments using the tests project, I have everything already present. So
that's all good. Well, since you've kind of mentioned it just now anyway, what about unit tests? Because I know we can do that for other programming languages within GitHub Actions.
Well, there's a couple ways that we can use unit testing. For example, we can use the tSQLt framework, which I prefer above other database unit testing frameworks, especially because it keeps the developer in its tSQLt bubble. It is only tSQL, but problem with that is that you probably have to create a lot of tests for all your objects. And because I'm lazy as hell when it comes to repetitive tasks, I created a PowerShell module called the tSQLt test generator. And this module enables you to point to a database and then it iterates through all the objects like the tables, store procedures, the views, the functions, all those objects. And it will generate basic unit tests like the object existence, the database collation, does my store procedure have the correct parameters, does my table have the correct columns with the correct data types, all those kind of things. And if I run that, no, it's not that one, number 3, create the unit tests, it will connect to my database, and then generate all these unit tests on the fly. So there it is. I'm using it locally. Maybe I'm going too fast for annoying about that error. Go, come on. And we're done. So if I go back to Visual Studio and I right-click the test basic folder and I say add existing item, because I generated these tests right into my test basic folder. So I can just say, okay, here are my tests. And now I have all my unit tests in here. And I can just go in. Here it is. So it's going to check if my table 1 or my store procedure table 1 create is present. Database collation is an important one, because you don't want to do any deployments with a different collation. That's going to be it's going to generate a lot of problems. Something like the correct columns for my table, which is maybe some developer changed it along the way by accident or explicitly, and that is going to cause a problem. So you can really easily get started and get these unit tests going. Don't run this module every single time for the entire set of objects, because it's going to overwrite the other tests, and then you will always have a successful test, which wouldn't make any sense. So that is how we can do unit testing.
Well, that sounds good. I actually remember you showed me that before in the past. In fact, whilst you're explaining about tSQLt there, everybody, I multitasked a bit because I've heard it a few times now. And I experimented with the YAML pipeline you created previously using this. Luckily, I've already created something called a runner locally on my laptop, which we will cover shortly in this session as well. So, however, before we delve too much into how it all connects with GitHub Actions, what I'm going to quickly just do here, change this column name inside. This is a local copy of the repository in GitHub that's on my laptop. So I'm just, as you can see here, changing the column name. save that change. So if I go to source control now, I'm just going to say I'll change the column quickly. Commit that to my local copy, which is also called a local clone. And then because I'm very lazy, I'm just going to select sync in Azure Data Studio, which literally syncs my local copy of the repository with the one that's stored in GitHub. And then from there, go into GitHub Actions now. You can actually see, Sander, I've made a few creative changes to your actual initial one that you created. Now, before anybody sees this and panics, what I will do very quickly, go down here, what GitHub tries to do in GitHub Actions when it creates an initial plan, it tries to squeeze everything into its frame as possible. And obviously I understand it makes it smaller for you, but I show this so to highlight the fact that you can actually zoom in as well. And it has dynamic panning, which I think is a really nice feature that GitHub put into this product. So going back to this, and as you can see, I've kind of slightly modified your original one. So as well as your building unit testing stages, I've added 3 stages called integration, staging, and production, which are actually 3 separate SQL Server instances I have installed locally on 3 separate Docker containers, which you can actually see in the dashboard here. So what happens is after your unit test is complete, it will then deploy to an integration environment, which is a SQL Server instance, and an integration environment is where you tend to do your integration tests. And then it will go to a staging environment where you tend to do all your user acceptance testing. And then finally, a production environment, which is represented by another SQL Server instance. And the reason there's underscores on here at the moment is because GitHub Actions, when it creates the plan here, tries to arrange it all nicely based on the alphabet. So from there as well, I actually thought, since those 3 deployments worked, I thought I'd extend it a bit more. So I set it up to do a sync with a repository that's actually in Azure DevOps. So if you want another copy of your repository in Azure DevOps as well, you can synchronize to a repository there. And then from there, within Azure DevOps, if you wanted, you can do other things like you run another Azure pipeline if you needed to for some reason. And it's quite easy to do that, so I know you can flip between the 2 different ones. And because I got the sync working, I thought, well, I wonder what else I can do. So I looked and see if there was a way that I could take a SQL Server 2019 database project and make it ready to be deployed to other SQL Server related platforms as well. So as you can see here, I tested it first for Azure SQL Database, and that worked and deployed to an Azure SQL database just fine. I then tested it to, I thought I would get a bit more ambitious and test to deploy to an Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pool as well, using just exactly the same repository. So basically, your database project gets deployed to this as well, without having to keep multiple copies of your project. And I was actually able to do this quite easily behind the scenes by using some native PowerShell. So all I simply done was change one line in the SQL proj file. From there, I was able to build it and then publish the dat pack for it as well. So what do you think about that?
Well, that's all well and good, but what if you want to do approvals like you can do it in Azure DevOps?
Well, I'm glad you asked, and I've actually got something here that will help highlight this as well. You can actually do approvals in GitHub as well. As you can see, I'm asked to approve one on one that I actually created earlier. And I was able to do this in the settings section. And if I scroll down here, you can see there's an environments tab. And just like Azure DevOps, you can create your environments in GitHub now as well. And this was introduced towards the end of last year. So if I click on this environment, for example, you can see that either of us have to approve the deployment to whichever environments we specify in the YAML code. So if I click on here now, I can just select that, and that will approve and deploy it. So I hope that answers your question for you.
Yeah, just a reminder that you can use the SSDT deployment tool I showed you earlier with GitHub Actions as well.
Of course, you can do a whole host of other services using GitHub Actions as well, not just SQL Server. So if I go back to here, for example, now, and I go back to the Actions again, and I select New Workflow, if I scroll down here, you can see it comes with a lot of predefined workflow templates, so we can deliver to things like Kubernetes as well.
Cool. So if only we were playing data platform bingo right now.
Another one we could tick off.
Yeah.
So anyway, like I said earlier, I have a GitHub runner locally on my machine. And I've seen that we can have these runners running even within our own network on premises, which is service that Microsoft hosts in Azure. They do a lot of the processing of the build and release tasks, like building nefarious artifacts and deploying them, like the DAT packs that we saw earlier, for example. However, it appears that because of our infrastructure, we would have a lot of issues internally. For example, we'd have to raise a lot of firewall requests for the GitHub runners in Azure to be able to connect up to our servers locally on premises. So maybe we're better off building our own GitHub runners internally instead, Sander.
Maybe. But remember, a lot of us are developers, so we don't really want to build our own servers. Plus, we have to figure out exactly what software we need installed on those agents and maintain them. Oh, GitHub Action environment. Hey, it's gone.
When the focus is on it. So, as you can see here, hopefully everybody, Microsoft actually produces a guide on how you can create your own images to use for these GitHub runners. And in fact, these are actually exactly the same images that you would use for Azure DevOps agents as well. It's exactly the same build, effectively.
So, I suppose now you're going to tell me that we're better off running it as a service as well.
Well, actually, it depends. It makes sense to run it as a service on a server that you have deployed, especially if you're going to use it the same as Microsoft does as a runtime use. So basically, it's used for one particular workflow, and then that server is pretty much destroyed. However, if you're doing a lot of testing on your own personal laptop, especially if you're testing a lot with both Azure DevOps agents and GitHub runners, it does mean that your services command net is going to get cluttered pretty fast. So you actually might be better off running them individually on their folders instead. And it's actually quite handy if you run it in a separate monitor as well, so you can view the progress of your jobs. Because I have noticed at times that there is a bit of a lag if you run it just viewing the GUI within GitHub itself. So I'm just going to show you here. So this is how it looks if you run it from the command line. And as you can see, it's not 100% verbose, but it will tell you when your jobs are completed.
Nice. So we can also do something with packages in GitHub. It supports all kinds of things like NuGet packages and Docker images. Rumor has it can also be used to store PowerShell modules like DBA tools as well.
Yeah, I've heard that you can do it using NuGet. Anyway, on that note as well, just a reminder for everybody that you are eligible to create your own GitHub account to test things on, as you've seen today, including GitHub free for organizations if required.
And that's probably a good thing to do, especially if you want to share open source solutions online or if you want to test out things without the fear of breaking your company's GitHub organization. You can also use it to do pull requests from popular repositories as well. For example, if you want to make changes to the SQL Server documentation, you fork it to your own personal organization. And then from there, you can create pull requests, a pull request right into the original repository.
Yeah, and to be honest, and we're back on the center screen, of course, still, There's other features I'm looking for the team using as well. So if we go back into GitHub again here, for example, as you pointed out earlier, we've got the wiki that we can experiment with.
And there are other integrations and tooling in GitHub as well. I say other, I mean a very large amount.
Yeah. And in addition to that as well, GitHub actually comes with its own CLI, I should say, that you can use with PowerShell, which actually got updated a few weeks ago to include commands for GitHub Actions, as you can see here. And I'll quickly demonstrate for you all quickly on the center screen. So let's make this a bit bigger as well, so it's a bit easier to view. And I'm just going to get the list of the last 5 runs in this repository. Focus. So, as you can see from there, it just shows the results of the last 5 GitHub Actions run. But of course, you can actually delve even deeper into these as well by using the GitHub run view command, as you can see at the bottom of the screen here. So, run these, and let's take the top one, for example. So if you give it a moment, it goes off and gets the information for you, and it says, yeah, here you go. Here's the run that was completed, and it gives you further breakdown. And as you can see, you can actually break it. It actually invites you down here at the bottom as well if you want to view the details of a particular job. So it also helps if the thing copy and paste works here. So put in a job here, just going to select the top job again up here, so you can get an even better view of this. And you can even dive even deeper into this as well. There's a functionality you can do. For example, you can download all the different artifacts into a folder of your choice. So for example, as you noticed earlier when I ran the earlier command of view, an overview of the whole workflow, it gives you a list of all the artifacts at the bottom. And then what you can do from there, once you know which artifact you want, you can just run the download command. And you can also do other things in the CLI as well. You can actually rerun particular workflows if you want to by using a simple grun rerun command. Well, I would demonstrate, however, we have got. But no, I will actually run it again now just to demonstrate it quickly. Just bear with me. Yeah, I've got a little bit of extra time, and it's good for everybody to see this in action. So let's go back to this again. So like I said, this is the command where you can download into a secure folder, to an alternative folder, I should say. So I'm just going to make sure that folder is empty again before I actually do it. Worth noting, the folder does ideally have to be empty before you download into it. Bit of advice for you all there. So I can do is this. Afterwards, I can do a directory of that folder, and I can actually there. And there you go. And as you can see, it's got the current timestamp, which reminds me that we have 5 minutes left for this session.
So nice. Remember, GitHub is so popular, even Microsoft uses it for their repositories like SQL Server documentation and Azure Data Studio. So where shall we begin?
Well, I suggest we start by getting both teams together and explain to them what we're trying to achieve here.
Anyway, that's all we've got time for today, folks. So I wonder if there are any questions. You can ask a question by raising your hand.
You can either raise your hand or put a question in the chat. At this moment in time, if there are any questions, what I can do quickly, since we've got a few minutes left, I will quickly do that approval here so I can show the rerun command for everybody as well. Then. So that one finished. Like Sander said, you need a question in the chat or raise your hand and just double check the chat as well. Okay, since we've got a few minutes left, what I will quickly show you is the rerun command in action as well, so you can all see for yourselves that it works, because this was a bit I skipped earlier. So like I said, we issue this. If you are going to download and use GitHub CLI, just something for you to be aware of. Once you authenticate, don't log out. It will be staying authenticated even if you restart your laptop as well in PowerShell. So, still ongoing and nearly finished. Then I will quickly show this from that. In fact, I can run this now and I'll show you quickly that it's actually going to be there queued up. So,
Enter again.
yeah.
Cannot be rerun. Did you break the workflow?
I think it's because it's still running. You can always improvise. Like in my home country, I can do a different one. It's the same workflow though. Right. So, there you go. And it's because it was still running at the time, that's why I couldn't issue the rerun. And I heard a bleep somewhere. There you go, so you can see it's running at the moment down at the bottom there. So that's how you issue the rerun command, everybody, and that was the missing part of that demo. Dead on 12:40, there are no more questions left from what I can see from anybody at the moment. Anybody has any questions afterwards, of course, reach out to myself and Sander. We're more than happy to answer any questions relating to this at all. We've both done a fair amount with this, and obviously Sander wrote his own tSQLt module, his generator, so to speak, which is available in his GitHub. You can ask us questions about that, or GitHub Actions, or pretty much anything relating to how to do SQL Server deployments and pipelines in GitHub. So wish.
Great. So I think we're going to leave now, and thank you for attending our session.
Very much, everybody.